Welcome to Season 3 of Writing in the Tiny House. We spent Seasons 1 and 2 building an entire library of episodes that you can reference regarding tips and tricks and advice on how to write fiction. For Season 3, we are taking a different approach. We are rolling up our sleeves and we are diving into short stories that have been in the public domain as a way to demonstrate what this entire process can look like. For Season 3, we are doing collections of episodes all regarding one short story, including a reading that I will be doing for you, and then a few more episodes after that where we have a guest and we discuss the various different things about that short story that work and may not work, so that you can learn what to look for in your own writing to become a better writer. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Writing in the Tiny House. Welcome to the discussion episodes of this series on Agatha Christie's The Plymouth Express Affair. A reading of this short story is Season 3, Episode 2, so be sure not to miss that. I am Devin Davis. I am the host of this show, and I am also a fantasy author. And I am here with Chrissy Barton, who will be joining me throughout this series.
Hey there, I'm Chrissy Barton. I'm a certified copy editor and owner of Little Syllables Editing, and you can find me at littlesyllables.com. While Devin and I share a love of literature, I think you deserve to know that we are also lifelong friends.
So welcome aboard this in-depth analysis of Agatha Christie's The Plymouth Express Affair. This discussion is about to leave the station. Welcome to this first discussion episode on this short story of Agatha Christie's The Plymouth Express Affair. So with this first episode, Chrissy and I Chrissy, are you there with me?
Yes, I am.
Of course she is. We just want to give a brief overview on the context of this short story, just because short stories such as this don't appear in modern literature as much. I mean, there is definitely a formula to this short story. There is a certain readership consideration that we get to understand before diving into the nitty-gritty of this short story. So yeah, I mean, with the Plymouth Express Affair, this short story first appeared. It was published in 1924 in a magazine. And so it just came into the public domain pretty recently. And the thing is, this is a short story by Agatha Christie, and it has, is it Inspector or Investigator Poirot?
It's a good question.
It has Hercule Poirot in it, who is
Yes.
he has 33 books. He is in 40 of Agatha Christie's books and in 50 of her short stories.
Wow.
I know, that's kind of a lot for this gentleman. And and the thing is, at the time in 1924, a couple of his books had already been released. It is very obvious in this short story that in order to understand the setting and understand the voice of how the story is presented, we needed to first read those other books. Right? So Chrissy, who do you think most of the readership of Agatha Christie, in 1924, who do you think most of the people reading her stuff were?
Well, I definitely think that it would be people living in England. And I say that because there's a lot of stuff with the geography, especially in this story, because it's a train and, it goes to different places. And a lot of that is just assumed that the reader is going to understand where all these places are. And there's other details, too, that I noticed, like one character is called the Honorable Mr. whatever his name is.
Uh-huh. And that's not
Um,
how we
and
refer to people in America.
that's not how we refer to people in America. I actually looked it up. It means he's like the second son of a duke or something like that.
Oh my
It's
goodness,
very
I thought it meant he was
specific.
a judge.
Or a judge. Yes, there were a couple of different things that he could be. He could be the son of a viscount or a baron or earl or a judge.
So some form of
Would be called
royalty or a
honorable.
judge.
Yeah. 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 So like things like that are things that people in England would probably know a lot more readily than more global readers, for sure.
Right. And what are some things in this story that make us understand that we needed to like first have this backlog of these other books first? Like just in your
Oh,
reading of this story, like what were some things that just come to mind of like, oh gosh, I kind of wish I would have known that.
well, see, I did know a lot of it because I've read some of the other books. But I think you were coming to this not having read any of the Poirot books, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so Poirot is a very quirky gentleman. And and so there are specific things that come up in every single book or story about him. And actually, this one does not mention his mustaches. I
Oh,
don't
does he
think it
play with
mentions
his
them at
mustaches a
all.
lot? It does.
Oh, he has magnificent mustaches
Oh,
that are brought up
wonderful.
all the time. But
It does
yeah.
talk about the little gray cells. Is that referencing his brain,
Yes,
his big
that is
brain?
referencing his brain, and it comes up in almost every one of the stories about him as well.
Okay, I
Yeah.
thought so because one of the characters,
The
Jap,
thing,
at the
yeah.
end talks about the little
Uh-huh.
gray cells and whatever. So,
Uh-huh. Yeah, and it also at one point mentions his green eyes, like when he's on to something, his eyes seem to get more green or something.
oh, that's
That's a thing that
fascinating.
also happens. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not
Yeah.
mentioned in this story.
His green eyes do show up towards the end, actually.
Oh, okay. I guess I must have missed it.
They do. You missed it.
Also, like, are there some mannerisms in the books that are well? The reason why I ask this is because in this story, there. This is a short story. It is under 5,000 words, which I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if the listeners have listened to the reading that I did in episode 2, it's only like 35 minutes long. Like it's not this is not a long story, but I'm a long story. It's a short story. And
Right.
because it's a short story, there are already some limitations and there are some things
Mm-hmm.
that like there's no room. Everything has to matter. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember when Poirot goes to visit Mr. Halliday, they were
Mm-hmm.
sitting, I guess, in Mr. Halliday's office. There's an amount of lack of setting. And
Yeah.
Poirot stands up to adjust like an inkwell on the gentleman's desk because it was askew. And he said,
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry, I just can't handle when things are askew. Because I didn't have Poirot's background with these other books, I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was going to play into something of him coming to the conclusion at the end of this murder mystery. Like
Right.
he would see something askew and it would bug him and he would go to fix it right and it would lead to some big reveal at the end.
Right.
However,
But it doesn't.
right?
It's just to do characterization.
Right, it's
Because yeah,
just
he
to
seems a little obsessive.
right, it's just to play to, I guess, to a mannerism or something that was established
Hmm.
somewhere else. And if you didn't have that background, then it seemed out of place as it did for me.
Right. And the other thing that you would need to know is who Hastings is.
Oh yeah.
Hastings is in a lot of the Poirot novels, and he often narrates them.
So
And in this story,
there are instances when he does not narrate.
I think anytime he's in one of them, he is the narrator.
Oh,
But
okay,
there are
great.
Poirot stories that don't have him in it.
Okay.
So they must be narrated in some other way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And in this one, you don't even like the story doesn't even tell you who he is until the very, very end. It doesn't give him a name.
Well, it gives him a name in the middle.
Oh, it does?
Poirot calls him Hastings in the middle of this, but
Oh.
yeah, like that's another thing. I'm sitting there reading this first person narration of they're going through the newspaper together, and Poirot is calling him his friend, and they're having this, familiar back and forth about this murder mystery that they're about to get called in for. And
Mm-hmm.
there is no name associated to the narrator. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that maybe I was misreading something. I don't know. And then I found the name in the middle of the story. I was like, oh, I guess we are
Yeah.
Mr. Hastings.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, it could have been anybody. There's no physical description of him.
Right.
It could have been a woman. It could have been, a fly on the wall. I don't know.
Yeah.
And had I not known that beforehand, it was just kind of different, I guess.
Yeah. It kind
So
of reminds me a little bit of like the book Rebecca. Have you read that?
I haven't
Where
read the
the
book Rebecca.
Oh, you should. The narrator never gets a name.
Oh, ever?
Yeah, I don't think she has a name at all.
Oh my goodness. Like,
It's interesting.
what's the
Yeah.
premise of that book?
It's like she meets this man and they fall in love and they get married. And when he takes her back to his house, basically she's kind of like haunted by his former wife, Rebecca. Not like as a ghost, but like the servant is like really liked Rebecca and all this. I don't know. There's just all these things that always lead back to Rebecca. And like she's kind of living in the shadow of Rebecca.
Uh-huh. But the
And he
narrator
never,
isn't Rebecca.
no,
Oh my
no,
goodness.
it's the former wife.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
like the late wife.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's
Anyway,
amazing.
yeah. But that's not what Agatha Christie is doing here. She just, but that's what it kind of reminded me of because you don't know who he is
Right?
until well into it. And I mean, you still don't get much about him. So you
No.
really don't know who he is. You just know his name is Hastings and he is a friend who is interested.
Right.
That's
And
basically it.
right. And when I was reading on like Wikipedia, he has a big background. Like he's done stuff. Like he is as fleshed out as Dr. Watson is in the Sherlock Holmes books. Like there's a history there that has been invented throughout these novels, but
Right.
none of it's in this story.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess she didn't think it was worth the space. I don't know.
I don't know. And yet some other things
I don't
were
know.
worth the space. It'd be interesting to ask her
Right.
about this one day.
Yeah, you should do that.
I know, I'll do that. But
Okay.
let's talk about the structure of this story, just because
Yeah.
I don't know. Agatha Christie is probably the most successful fictional author in history. And
Right.
there is definitely a formula to this story that is
Hmm.
found everywhere. So, what is that formula?
Well, it starts with a scene that is kind of removed from the rest of the story, where um, basically it's this character that you'll never see again,
Right?
and he
They even
finds
give him a name, Alex
they
Simpson.
give him a name. They give him a whole background. Actually,
Right?
he has more characterization than Hastings does.
He really does. And like
He really
the
does.
narration gets into his head. Like he remembers things
Yeah.
and, it's all there.
Right. Yeah. And his sole purpose is to find the body.
Well, it happens a lot like a CSI episode. Like
Right.
there's
It
this
shows you the
separate.
crime first,
Yes.
or somebody finding the body first, and then yeah.
And then we jump to the whodunit storyline. But
Right.
it's this separate story, and then suddenly, like in this sudden discovery of this body, everything comes to a screeching halt, and then we change storylines.
Literally.
Right, because the train
Yeah.
came to a screeching halt.
I actually super loved that sentence. And the great train came to an unwilling halt.
Yes, an unwilling halt in obedience to the imperative jerking of the communication cord.
Yes. Yeah.
And then we cut to Poirot reading the newspaper. So just that whole thing of a separate story to hook the reader, and then we have the whodunit plot line of, the investigation and gathering clues and gathering information, and then the big aha and the big reveal at the end. That is found in all crime stories everywhere. Like if like
Right.
any CSI, anything like that. And Agatha Christie uses it a lot, which is cool. I kind
Hmm.
of wonder if she
Yeah.
kind of did it. Right,
Yeah.
if that was kind of her own original thing.
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know things.
I don't know.
So,
Maybe we'll have to read more mysteries from that same era
I know, huh?
and find
We
out.
might have to go
Yeah.
into like Arthur Conan Doyle here in the next little
Oh
series of
yeah.
writing in the
Oh,
tiny
it's gonna be
house.
fun.
That could be
Yeah.
cool. So, what are just some of the structural differences in the way that this short story is compared to what we see in modern short stories or in modern whodunits?
Well, it really seemed really fragmented, which maybe is not specific to this era that it was written in, but I mean, it's definitely divided into little sections. I mean, even physically, like
Mm-hmm.
different scenes, it's doesn't flow super well.
It's right. It's pretty rushed.
Yeah, and then there's that section where the editors jump in and tell you to predict the ending.
Right. And that was one of the biggest differences for me. I was like, what? Why are we
Yeah,
doing this? Just because we don't see
yeah,
that in fiction. We see that in something like dinner theater or
right.
if we're doing an escape room, um,
Uh-huh.
or something like that. Like take a second and talk amongst yourselves. And I'm sitting
And
here
it
alone in
almost
the
kind
tiny
of,
house.
yeah, it almost kind of gives it away because then you realize, oh, I have everything I need at this point, right?
Well,
Like
it gives it
like you should
away.
have figured it out.
Right. Like it's all here. Let's see if you're smart.
Hmm.
Also, it gives away how the book is being wrapped up. Like
Yeah.
there's definitely a formula to her story here, and they're
Hmm.
saying, "Oh, by the way," as I mean the editors are rushing in and saying, "The ending is happening now." So now you know.
Yeah. So that you don't have to have it spoiled if you still need to think it over. Yeah,
Right.
I think by that point it's pretty obvious who did it though. So
To
yeah.
be perfectly honest, I didn't guess it.
Really?
I didn't guess it. So I love
Oh.
whodunits, but I guess I am the dumbest reader ever. Like whodunits are fun. I love them, but I am always surprised at the end.
Uh, that's fun though. What a good
It
way to
is
be.
fun. It's super fun. At the same time, I worry.
Maybe with good reason, but maybe not.
Right? Maybe with good reason.
Yeah.
But just one last thing before we wrap up this episode of the discussion. What
Hmm.
was your experience with the geography that was mentioned in this story?
Oh, it was driving me so crazy that
Why?
because it is mentioned so much, like this town and this town and this town. And because the train's going from station to station, obviously. And I was like, I don't know where any of these places are. So I finally looked them up on a map to see like where this train was supposed to be going and where the victim ended up and all of this stuff.
So, did you
And
look up a train map or just
no, I
like
just looked up
just
a
a town
map of
map?
that part of England
Yeah.
to see where the towns were in relation to each other.
Yeah,
And
okay.
I think it really added to the story knowing that, because I think it, you know, it shows that the murderer was really trying to cover their tracks, because the body ends up in a completely different place than where the victim was supposed to be.
Simply because of the
And
train.
simply because of the train. Yeah, because of the train routes and schedules and all that. But so it was interesting to look
Yeah.
into that.
And that is cool. At the same time though, it shows that Agatha Christie compiled some information that mattered and that was
Right.
super cool and had its own
Yeah.
fun application to the mystery, which is fun.
Yeah.
At the same time though, it like with the way that it's just text, I guarantee that
Hmm.
when this was published in the magazine, it did not include a train route or like a picture.
Right.
And I don't know, like I just think back to modern short stories. I'm sure that this would have either been set up a little bit differently or included a map, or there
Yeah.
would have been more narration describing where the towns lined up and where they were headed versus where the train that the body was found on went.
Right. And you kind of wonder too, like, if Christie had any idea of how widely it would be read. I mean, this day and age, you write something, you can just expect it to be read by people all over the world just because of the internet and whatever.
Right.
But
And like
in
random people.
1924,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
random people. So you can't assume that your reader knows anything. But at this point, written for a magazine, probably in London in 1924, she's probably assuming that her readers are familiar with the train routes around that area. So,
And
I don't know.
it was probably understood that every household had a map.
Oh, probably.
I mean, that was probably just a thing that everybody had.
Yeah.
So, I mean, with the short story, yes, there were differences, and it's important to point out the differences because it helps us to just kind of sink back into the things that come out as different. Like it helps us accept the differences, and it helps us to understand what the modern take on these different things are now, so that we can, better understand what to expect in modern short stories, and with our own writing, how to stray away from something like this.
Right. Yeah. You
Cool.
definitely have to think about who your reader is going to be and what they come into it already knowing.
Exactly.
It makes a big difference.
It's about understanding your readership.
Right.
I like that. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Writing in the Tiny House. If you are interested in supporting this show, and if you are interested in following me on social media, all of that information can be found or at least accessed in the content of the show notes of this episode. Also, for every guest that we have on Writing in the Tiny House, all of their professional information, all of their social media stuff, and the website to their business or whatever it is they do is also found in the description in the show notes. So thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode, and we hope to see you again soon.